Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, I'm going to be giving you guys my opinion on the best top laners for patch 6.12. So first up right now is going to be Gangplank. I think that Gangplank is a champion who has very strong potential, but he's also a champion that you need to practice a lot and you need to take time to learn him in order to be successful on the champion. Once you do get his barrel combos down, then you can be a monster with him in those mid to late game team fights. If you can get a nice AoE barrel chain off, it will just do a ton of damage, and if you can get that off on a few squishy targets, then you can just win team fights for your team by getting your barrel combos off. His ultimate is great as well if you can use that correctly in a team fight. Also, whenever I do hit level 6 as Gangplank, I always like to keep an eye on my mid lane and on my bot lane, and if they are going in for a fight, I just throw my ultimate down there, and a lot of the time you will pick up an assist. You can even get lucky and get a kill sometimes, so just always be sure to check your lanes at level 6 when you are playing GP. He also does have a very low cooldown cleanse with his W, so that just allows him to stay pretty safe in team fights. If he does get caught out by a thresh hook, then he can just use his W, cleanse that, and then walk away. He does also have pretty good matchups right now in the top lane. He really doesn't have any, or there aren't really any champions that hard counter him in the laning phase. If he is in a little bit of a harder matchup, then he can just farm with his Q if he needs to. A few cons to GP are that his barrel mechanics are definitely very unique and a little bit harder to get used to, and he is also a pretty easy gank target in the early game. Next up is going to be Wukong. So Wukong is also a very strong teamfight top lane champion. Once you do get your level 11 on Wukong, your ultimate gains a lot of damage. I'm pretty sure at rank 1, your ultimate with Wukong does around 20 base damage per tick, but once you level it up to rank 2, I think it's like 110 base damage per tick, so that's really good. His ultimate scales really well with AD too, so if you do go for an assassin Wukong build and you get ahead in the early game, then you can just absolutely melt the squishies in those mid to late game team fights. He snowballs really hard in the laning phase as well, so if you can just pick up that first kill, then you can look to roam, get some nice TPs off, because when you do hit level 6, your TPs are very strong with your ultimate, so just be sure to keep an eye on bot lane and go for a TP if the opportunity looks good. He also does have a very strong level 6 all-in. I would recommend telling your jungler to gank you at level 6, because as long as you don't play it like completely stupid, then you should be able to get a kill at level 6 due to your strong crowd control with your ultimate. And he does also have pretty good juking potential in his kit with his W. A few cons to Wukong are that he is pretty weak if you do fall behind with him, and he is also pretty weak against disengage enemy comps. If the enemy team does already have a Janna lock, then I would not pick Wukong in that situation. Next up is going to be a champion that I think is very underplayed right now and deserves a lot more play right now in both the top lane and the mid lane, and that champion is Kenan. So I feel like Kenan is just a very strong champion after the introduction of the Hextech Proto Belt item. This just allows him to engage really effectively. Even if his flash is on cooldown now, he can still engage pretty good because he goes in with his E, he uses his Proto Belt, and let's say like if his flash is off cooldown, then his engage is pretty much foolproof. And if you can get a nice flash engage off with Kenan, get your ultimate off in a mid to late game team fight, I've just found myself single-handedly carrying games and pretty much like 1v3ing a team fight because your ultimate does so much AoE damage, your W is also going to do a lot of AoE damage too, and then you also have like your Q to finish them off if they are still on low HP. So I just really like Kenan because of his crazy strong team fight. He's a pretty good laning top lane champion too. He is ranged, so he really doesn't have any hard matchups right now in the top lane. He's got great mobility too with his E, so it's really hard to gank a Kenan in the early game. And like I said before, his flash engage is just such a strong tool, and if you can get that off in a mid to late game team fight, then you can just win games easily with Kenan by doing that. And a few cons to him are that he is weaker against disengage. Same goes for Wukong, that goes for Kenan in my opinion. If the enemy team does already have Janna lock, then I would not pick him in that situation. And he is also pretty weak if his ultimate is on cooldown. So when you're playing Kenan, you want to work around your ultimate's cooldown. If it's on cooldown, then I would just let your team know, let them know when it's going to be up, and only try to fight when you do have your ultimate off cooldown. Next up should really be no surprise here, and that champion is Irelia. So after the Trinity Force changes, Irelia has pretty much been a pick or ban in the top lane. Once she does finish Sheen, and especially once she finishes Trinity Force, she can pretty much outduel any other top lane champion. The thing that makes Irelia so strong is her E ability. Even if she is going up against someone like a Gnar or a Kenan in the laning phase that can poke her down, it's kind of to her advantage because the way Irelia's E works is just really weird in my opinion, and I feel like they need to change this because it kind of rewards her for taking poke and it rewards her for getting low on HP, which really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So even if the enemies do poke her down, it's to her advantage because if she's lower HP than her opponent, she can dash to a low health minion, stun the enemy, and just burst them down, and they really can't do a whole lot to counter that, and that is why she is a very strong pick right now. She's also got a very good mid game. She really only needs to build one damage item, being the Trinity Force. If you do get ahead with her and all of your lanes are snowballing, then you can go for another damage item on her if you like, but I find myself just going Trinity Force and then full tank and doing pretty well on her. She does have true damage as well, which makes her a really strong dueling champion. Her sustain in the laning phase is also quite good with her W, and then her level 6 all-in, like I touched on earlier, is just absolutely crazy, especially if she does have her Sheen finished. Her gap closer is also really nice for just using it to CS in the laning phase. I find it really easy to CS with Irelia under tower because of her Q, and it's also a really good tool to dash to that low health minion beside the enemy champion, stun the enemy champion, use your ultimate, use your auto attacks, burst them down a little bit, and if they do try to get away and they do try to flash away, then you can just use your Q to finish them off, and that is another reason why Irelia is just such a strong pick. She is a bruiser top lane champion too, which just makes her a really hard champion to deal with. A few cons to her are that she does have a weaker levels 1 to 3. I find myself not really doing too well for those first few levels against some of the ranged top lane champions, so that's when you can try to punish Irelia. If you are playing someone like a Kenan or a Gnar, then you can try to poke her down and try to kill her before she can get to her power spike. And she is also quite a bit weaker late game compared to some of the other top laners like Kenan or Swain. And to round out the top 5 for this video is going to be Swain. So I did touch on this in my mid lane video I made this patch, but Swain is getting a nerf in 6.13 to his ultimate. The cooldown is getting increased by quite a bit, so if you have not bought Swain yet, then I would hold off on buying him until next patch so we can see if this nerf is going to affect him too much. But if you do already own Swain, then he is still a great pick right now for top and mid lane. He's especially a good pick for top lane though because he does have a lot of favorable matchups right now. He is a ranged champion, so a lot of the meta picks right now are melee, and that just allows him to easily CS in the laning phase and also easily poke down those melee champions. If they do end up going in for CS, then his zoning potential is really good with his Q. He can use his W on them, use his E, his Q, and that combo is going to chunk them to around half HP, maybe even lower if you do have a little bit of ability power, so he's just such an annoying champion to deal with in the laning phase. Once he does have his Rod and his Zhonya's finished, his teamfight becomes really good as well, so if you can get ahead with Swain in the early game and you can get to those items pretty quickly, then definitely look to start teamfighting because you could do some pretty good work in teamfights with those two items. He's also super hard to kill once you do get to late game. Once you do finish your Rod and your Zhonya's, if your team is going even or you're behind, then I would just recommend going pretty much full tank after that because it just allows you to be really tanky in those team fights, really hard to kill. And if you do have those tank stats, and especially if you do have the Spirit Visage, you're pretty much unkillable in a mid to late game team fight. Your ultimate is going to be healing you for an insane amount, and if you do get low on HP, you can pop your Zhonya's, and if there are enemies around you, you're going to be healing for a lot from your ultimate, so he's just such a hard champion to kill once you do get to that late game. He does have pretty strong crowd control as well with his Q and his W. I really like that he does have versatile build pass, and this is one of the main reasons why I think he's just such a great pick right now. If your team is lacking AP, then you can just go full damage Swain and do really well. If your team is lacking that tank champion, then you can go Rod Zhonya's and full tank after that and still do great on Swain. A few cons to Swain are that his W can be a little bit hard to hit if you're new to him, and he also does not have a gap closer, so when I play Swain or when I see other people playing Swain, they usually like to push out in the laning phase and they look to try to poke down the enemy top lane champion, so you can take advantage of this if you are playing jungle against him. If he is pushing out, then definitely look to try to camp him, look to shut him down in the early game, because if he doesn't get to that Rod and Zhonya's core build quickly, then he's really not going to be as effective. He needs those two items to really start doing some work, and if you can delay that build on him, then he's not going to be as effective as some of the other top laners. So I'm only going to be talking about 3 honorable mentions in this video, and the first champion is going to be Pantheon. So Pantheon does have a very strong early game against a lot of the meta top lane picks. When I play Pantheon top lane, I do like to run Ignite. You can definitely look for a pretty good cheese all in at level 2 with Pantheon. If you can poke them down a little bit at level 1 with your Q, and then just go for an all in at level 2 with him, then you can definitely get a nice snowball going in the early game. Once you do hit level 6 as Pantheon, definitely look to go for a roam either mid lane or bot lane, because you can definitely help snowball your lanes really well with Pantheon. Next up is going to be Cassiopeia. So Cassiopeia is also a great pick right now for top lane because she does have a lot of favorable matchups. The only champion I can really think of that can bully her out in the laning phase would be Pantheon. If you can poke her down in the laning phase at level 1 with Pantheon and then try to all in her at level 2, you can beat her that way, but a lot of the other picks right now really can't bully her too hard in the laning phase. Once she does get her core item, she can start to do a lot of damage, and because she cannot buy boots, if she can get to her 6 item build, then she just becomes absolutely crazy strong. And as long as you can play her correctly and you can hit your poison in team fights, you can get a load of damage off with her E, and you can definitely carry very hard with Cassiopeia. And the last champion on the honorable mentions is going to be Rumble. So Rumble is a really good teamfight top lane champion. I like him a lot because even if you don't have the best laning phase as Rumble, you really only need your Liandry's to be effective. The reason being is because his ultimate provides really strong crowd control and it just synergizes really well with the Liandry's. So if you can get to that item, then you can start to do really well in teamfights and you can do a lot of damage. Even if you do go like 0-1 or 0-2 in the laning phase as him, then don't get too upset, because as long as you can hit good ultimates in those mid-game team fights, then you can definitely make up for your poor laning phase on Rumble. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then please be sure to leave a like, subscribe if you have not already. So thanks for watching, guys. Have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.